Well, that's the beauty of these conversations is very often, when you're asking a set of rote questions or answering a set of what's your favorite lens, what's your favorite aperture, etc., etc., they don't tell us very much about you. Whereas I'm much more interested in you because you've got this huge wealth of experience. You've had this career, as you said, like spanning 4 decades with a camera in your hand. And the knowledge and the IP and the perspectives and your perceptions wrapped up in your brain are of great value. And to me personally, whether we were recording this or not, I'd still be interested in listening to what you have to say. Now, obviously, the fact that you started when you did, the tool that we had at our disposal, and I still do shoot film from time to time. I've got a little Hassie 501cm, which I spend time with, and that's my slower downer. Is that process of. But the images back then or now through that medium, the medium itself has such a huge impact on not only the process, but the aesthetic qualities or the nature of the final product.
Yeah.
Whereas this digital development that's happened in the last 20 years or so has opened up possibilities that weren't open to us with a more limited medium. Even just dynamic range as an example of that. Bigger, longer focal lengths, medium and large format, you don't have that great degree of magnification. Do you think also that how society and the whole photographic market is changing, with the sheer volume of photographers all out with lots and lots of expensive equipment going all over the world to document every nook and cranny of it? Do you think that this is creating an environment where people can be more open, more experimental, more inquisitive about a broader range of things, but there's a risk also of having to avoid the homogeny that social media demands? Do you think that there's a fulcrum that exists between total freedom of speech and expression versus this somehow overriding force of we have to be popular?
I don't have any stats to back it up, but
No.
my feeling would be that the percentage of people who do more experimental or less mainstream photography is probably about the same now as it was before social media. It's always been small. Social media is very normative, generally speaking. The dopamine hit thing tends to make people want to produce stuff that gets them likes, and that's not really great for creativity. And the same thing happens with most competitions. Most competitions are normative. Then they're ostensibly there to promote diversity, to promote creativity, but what they tend to do is to promote particular ways of seeing, because over time, if not initially, what's seen is that those ways of seeing are the ones that win.
Right.
Now, in theory, there's no reason why it has to be that way. And I suppose for something like the International Wildlife Photographer of the Year, that is less normative, I think, than most. They have a very good panel. They have a very good system for discussing the entries, and you can champion people's work, which I think is a really good way of doing it. Most of the other systems, I don't think, actually have that effect at all. And sometimes sponsors really skew things. So I think there's a tendency, I think, that the longer we do something, the more likely we are to think, oh, I might try something else. So I think a lot of people start off from that illustrative position and over time they might trend towards doing something that was less illustrative and maybe more transcendent. How long that period is will vary a lot from individual to individual. And some people do that very quickly. Some people very quickly decide, well, no, I think this is just as a lot of the art world has long felt, photography is, a mechanistic process, and I need to do something that moves me beyond that transcription of reality. So I think that overwhelmingly there is a homogeny, as you put it, but there are a lot of people doing, because more people are photographing, there are now a lot more people who are doing interesting things as well. And it's much easier for them to disseminate their images than it used to be. However, it's also much easier for them to get lost. Because if you think about it, if you think 30 years ago, the only way we really saw people's photography would have been in books or in exhibitions. And so it was a very small kind of funnel, basically, through which everything was fed. And the stuff that came out the other side piqued your interest more. Now, because there's just this enormous mass on the net and you have no hope whatsoever of ever seeing even a tiny fraction of it, it's very difficult sometimes for us to find those more unusual approaches. And I suppose that's where somebody like Tim comes in, by actually kind of leading us towards different ways of making images, by exploring the work of photographers who perhaps would not otherwise be have so much exposure. I mean, if you look on the stats for Facebook, then it's kind of scary what does really well. It's not necessarily bad photography, but it's not necessarily particularly creative or particularly interesting either. I wrote a piece for Tim. I think it was in the last.
I read it.
And I think I said something like, the problem with standing in front of an amazing view is that it's very easy for people to mistake your creative vision for what you've presented in the picture.
I thought it was an excellent article. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. So it's to make people think about photographs, to make people think more about what's presented to them. You have to move beyond just that illustrative position. And that also requires the audience to be open to making an effort, which not everybody is open to making an effort. Lots of people will just be happy to see the nice pictures of Yosemite or wherever go past, rather than to actually kind of really want to invest some time and some thought into understanding a picture. I always think it's really interesting. Oh God, I've forgotten his name now. The guy who did the Rhine picture. This is awful that I've forgotten his name. Not Thomas Struth. He's one of the Becker School of Photography. The most expensive photograph ever made. Why can't I think of his name? Senior moment. Sorry about this. Anyway,
we'll edit this bit out.
So lots of photographers latch on the fact that it was worth, I think, $2.5 million. I think it sold for initially. And they look at it and they say it's a boring photograph, but that's not the point of the photograph. For a landscape photographer who's working in the more pictorial tradition will look at that picture, which is very formal, which is very stripped down, and say that's boring. That's not the point of Andreas Gursky. That's not the point of the photograph. The point of the photograph is to explore that connection between reality and the photograph. And you have to see it big, you have to see the original, and you have to understand that it's about sort of balancing detail and information, and stripping all of that back as well. And it's questioning reality, because it's very heavily manipulated. It's had a lot of stuff edited out of it. So there are a lot of philosophical questions that are going on in that picture, and that is why it's interesting. Personally, not much that Gursky does moves me, but I do find him interesting as a thinker on photography, and the way he approaches photography, I find interesting. I quite like his 99 Cents series, for instance. Now, there's a problem where photographers assess other people's work according to what they see as a set of idealized views. You know, this makes a good landscape photograph, or this makes a good landscape photograph. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier about how many photographers start and end really with subject and object, and they don't think about what might be beyond the object, what actually the object might represent, what its connotations are. And I blame the way that art is taught in this country, certainly. I think it's a bit better in Europe, but it's not. I don't know that it's a lot better in the States, from what I understand. And so people are not willing to actually look at a photograph like Gursky's picture of the Rhine 2, I think it's called, and say, well, what's that about? Well, you know, we're not taught how to critique something. We're not taught how to actually look at something and say, okay, well, what does it mean? It's always, the assessment is usually just on, do I like how it looks? And that shouldn't be the sole criteria. Yeah, it's an important criteria. You know, one of the reasons why people still love Titian's paintings is they are beautiful. Yeah, you know, beauty doesn't go out of fashion. No, but there are other things going on, you know, and that if you get into the history of art and you realize that all the allegorical things that are going on in a Renaissance painting, all the stuff that's about technique, all the stuff that's about the construction of perspective and how new that was, and there's so much more going on in that painting than people wearing pretty robes, which is what a lot of people get when they stand in the National Portrait Gallery and they look at a painting like that. So there's that. It's very difficult to get people to engage, and I don't know what the answer to that is. I certainly know that it's not arty bollocks, you know, where you get this tract of text which is completely indecipherable next to a photograph which is supposed to help you understand it, which is a thing that I really abhor. But I think there should be some way, I don't know what it is, to actually, in plain language, start that educative process.
You get your money's worth with these questions.
I think I probably went down about 5 rabbit holes there.
I just love it. I just absolutely love it. It's fascinating to me, and I think I said to you right at the beginning of all this, even if people didn't actually watch it and listen to it, I'd still find it fascinating. So I'm enjoying it, and I'm sure that I know my audience, that people are fascinated with this, because you've used words like transcendence and understanding and society, and those 3 things are big global issues. I mean, they're as old as man himself, Homo sapiens rather than man. But this concept of engagement, and this is where finding that balance between social media and inner creative satisfaction and meaning. And I'm going to come back a little bit, because the personal development thing that you've talked about, it's all wrapped up in this. It's all wrapped up in perception and understanding and taking the time to investigate these questions. And I think the very point that, or the very fact that you're asking these questions is a transcendent part of our evolution. So you've raised so many different points in that last 5 or 10 minutes. I think, and likewise, I could just go down innumerable different rabbit holes with this. One of the things that I am interested in is, you're a professional photographer, artist, writer, educator. The label is immaterial to a certain extent. You're David Ward, and you make your living out of making photographs and helping other people to do the same to a
Yeah.
certain extent. You know, one of the things that's increasingly obvious to most people is that making a living as a landscape photographer is hard. You know, it's a saturated market of lots and lots of people trying to market their products or to sell their images, and so many different avenues have been closed off. You know, even stock prints don't, you know, there's no big print sale market as there was perhaps historically. You know, the whole marketplace is changing as the tsunami of photographers washes over the whole place. You've talked about the development of your own photography, and albeit a limited spectrum of of stylistic diversity, shall we say. But there's still a difference between photographs that are made as a utility to sell a workshop or to illustrate an article or something like that, versus moments of just optimal living where you're in that personal moment in your own existence where you're
In the flow.
engaging with something, this flow state. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to develop other language rather than flow state. I'm still working on it. Mindlessness, I'm calling it. That's my current favorite.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not a bad way of looking at it, because you're lost to reality in a way.
Right. Yeah. So mindlessness is my current favorite word to describe that. Do you think that the way the market is evolving, and people like yourself, and I think I'm in a similar boat, and Joe, and you know, there's so many photographers now who are, they're in a niche of their own almost. Do you find it easier now to just make photographs as yourself and not have to think so much about the utility of those photographs as maybe 20 years ago, where there was an expectation of what you were going to be producing to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons that I got out of doing commission work, was because I was fed up of making pictures for other people. And once I started teaching, I realized that actually, for me to be authentic, for me to be genuine in front of my students, meant that really I needed to make the pictures that were me, and not pretend somebody else's style or somebody else's approach was the one that I liked. So I'd make a few pictures which have a utility, that have a purpose. I don't know, given that 43.5% of all statistics are made up, I'd say it's about 10%. And the rest are just pictures for me.
Right.
Yeah. And that's not been perhaps the most financially advantageous approach that I could have taken. But it's been better for my personal well-being, I think, than making images for somebody else. Now, that's really to do with my personality as much as it is to do with anything else. Somebody like Paul Wakefield, he's a fantastic landscape photographer. He's also a great advertising photographer, and he enjoys that process of solving the client's problem. And he does it very well, and he makes brilliant images for his clients as well as brilliant personal images. And he lives, I think he really lives the life of an artist in lots of ways. But it's not what would suit me. I feel much happier just being able to do what I want to do when I want to do it, pretty much. Within the constraint, dry cough, no. Within the constraints of earning a living.
Right.
Yeah. At teaching. Yeah. You say it's difficult to earn a living as a landscape photographer. I'd say I don't think I know a single person now who really earns their living just as a landscape photographer. They all do something else. They all do teaching, or they do some print sales, or they do video logs or whatever. Yeah, Thomas Heaton makes his money from, as far as I can gather, I don't know Thomas, but as far as I can gather, from whatever advertising sales he gets on the back of having so many followers. that's the way that the world is. You have to think of yourself, I think, which I'm spectacularly bad at doing. You have to think of yourself as a brand.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. I mean, we at Expressive Photography, we make all of our money from education. I mean, almost exclusively from education. I'm an educator first. I mean, photography is a medium of creativity for me, but the education side of what I do is less about helping people make better photographs and more about helping people to be better people through the medium of creativity.
Right.
So that's my angle in the whole thing, which is very, as you say, it suits my personality and it suits my own needs as a human. You know, I need to explore this. You know, that's
Yeah.
my area of fascination, and whether it's with a guitar in my hand or a camera in my hand or I'm typing or writing or talking, this to me is creativity. I think I kind of joked about it at the beginning of the conversation, that this is a creative exchange between two brains that are exploring possibilities and reacting and being stimulated through the other person's dialogue. And I think that's a beautiful way to have a conversation, is just to be spontaneous and creative. We've done a little over an hour thus far. I feel we're only just wandering around the event horizon of the possibilities of where this conversation
go. Well, that brings to mind black holes. I'm not sure about that, but yeah.
Well, you know, this is my perspective on this whole thing, is that society creates a kind of a black hole for us that we exist in, and we're not encouraged to explore what's on the outside of it very often. So that I quite often talk about.
I agree with that. Yeah, we live by what we perceive are truths without questioning them.
Right.
So often. Yeah.
I think as we evolve as well, this creative life is how I describe it, and the act of transcendence, which I think is a really important part of our growth as people. You know, having that strength of character to do what is right rather than what is expected or maybe the most financially rewarding. I think it takes, as you say, quite a strength of character or a certain type of character. But I think what I've enjoyed most about this conversation is your insights into the relationships that you have with the world around you, you know, this inquisitive nature. And it seems to me that, putting aside business, I think one of the things we share, and one of the things that clearly you have in common with Joe, is the act of being in those moments and fully present in those moments seems to be the thing that transcends everything else. You know, the product almost is just a full stop at the end of that experience to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think that. One of the things I enjoy about teaching is actually helping somebody to find a solution to the problem of composition that they're presented with. Even if it's not my picture, I find really a satisfying thing to do. And I think when I was shooting film, you know, the 5:4 transparency is just such a beautiful object. You put it on the light box and it's glorious. If you've got it all right and the gods are with you, then it's the most amazing jewel-like thing.
Yeah.
And that for me was always, yeah, like you say, the full stop. But actually what I enjoyed most was the process, was actually finding the composition, finding the subject, the object, finding the composition, working out how I wanted to photograph it, how that spoke to me, how that related to my inquiry into the difference between how the mind and eye combination and the camera see. That whole sphere of things was actually what interested me more, in a way, than the final photograph. And it's still, to some extent, I think that's still true. And for a long time, you couldn't buy a David Ward print. And that was really because I wasn't interested. I suppose COVID actually has made me somewhat interested, because, you know, when you become properly poor, you think, well, maybe I ought to sell a print or two, but it wasn't. I wasn't interested in it in a way because I think, or I thought that in a way that was there was almost something boastful about it. Now that seems ridiculous, I suppose, but and I firmly believe that art should be shared. That otherwise, it's akin to the sin of onanism. You can look that up.
I know what it means.
um, and so we need to share it, and I was perfectly happy about sharing it along with words in a book or in an article. But selling prints seemed like almost a like, oh, look at me, aren't I clever thing, which I'm not interested in. So yeah, it seemed a bit too self-promoting, which seems ridiculous, but that's how I've thought about it for a long time. Yeah, I think the process is what really fascinates me, and that inquiry is what fascinates me, and photography is the tool that I've chosen. But there was, when I was at school, I loved drawing, I loved painting, so it could easily have been a different visual art that I chose. I was also, very interested in sciences, which I think is why my approach is a little bit more analytical, maybe. I'm nowhere near rigorous enough, but there's a kernel of something in there.
There's so many things. Like I said, every time we go down another rabbit hole, it opens up another avenue of conversation. I think what I'm going to do is we'll make this one the last, because otherwise it's just going to be forever long. The last thing you were just picking up on there was very much that the process itself is an act of self-actualization. It's self-fulfilling. It's it's an introspective thing, because it's very much wrapped up in our own perception, our own beliefs, our own values, our own eyes, our own, the science and the psychology of perception. So that's very much. And the more that we can be in a mindless state or a flow state or an engaged state, most of the world disappears during those states. We don't tend to be worrying about our anything else in the world, be it politics or COVID or all of those things that infringe upon our brains 24/7, more or less. So the act of being out in the landscape, engaged with a little part of it, is a very self-satisfying thing and a very self-actualizing thing. As soon as we have this product, even though the sharing of it is a fundamental part of the creative process, or can be the fundamental part of the process, because I see sharing of these things as an opportunity for viewers who take the time to engage themselves with the product, that there's an empathetic nature there, that people understand that it's represent, the metaphors that we weave into our work, the nuance, the emotions, the energy, and the aesthetics, they have a quality to them that is part of the human condition. Your reluctance to print and promote historically, that seems to be very much interwoven with a personality trait that
defect.
Pardon me?
Defect.
No. I wouldn't say defect, but the act of self-actualizing engagement seems to be something that's very much okay. Now, do you think there's just that sort of inherent Britishness that might be fundamentally part, that we don't want to elevate, we don't want to put our head above the parapet and appear better, or do you think there's just self-confidence is frowned upon in certain societies?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really, yeah, there is. I mean, we all know there is that trait in the British. I don't know if that's what I'm exhibiting, because I am in lots of ways. I'm very confident when I'm making pictures. I'm very confident about what I'm doing. Joe used to say that he thought I was afraid of succeeding. I think I'm afraid of failing. I think there is that. I think, and also for a long time I didn't have any spare cash, so putting on an exhibition was an expensive thing. And I did a few where I didn't sell very many pictures, and they cost me a lot of money. So that was, just the economics of it was one of the inhibiting factors, I guess. But there is a reticence. It's odd because I don't have a reticence about sharing ideas, and on a workshop I don't have a reticence about sharing imagery at all. I'm not really sure where the reticence comes from for kind of putting the prints out there as I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. I mean, maybe you are right. Maybe there is a kernel of that Britishness. I can't be seen to be boasting, shouting. I think when I'm making an argument, so I'm writing an article or I'm teaching, and I'm discussing something, and I'm putting forward a point of view, and I invite responses. And that's an engagement, like you say, between our minds. That's something that I find fascinating. But I would not be the kind of person to be declamatory without that engagement. And I can see people on the net who do that, who put forward their point of view without either seeking or wanting a response to that. And I would feel very uncomfortable about that, because I think all life is in a way is a conversation, and I think that it's really important that we remain open to other people's points of view, and that we remain cynical, that we question our own constantly, and you come to this. I suppose the crux of the matter is you come to this realization that to do anything creative, we need to be, for it to be worth its while, we need to be self-critical. That is the kind of nub of that. You might have ideas, but if you're not self-critical, then it's not going to be any good. I've met a few participants over the years, very few, who've been incredibly confident, and generally the pictures that they've made have been medium to poor, because they need to be able to look at it and go, no, that doesn't work. And so we're balancing, I think, and if you're in a creative world, you're balancing on a knife edge all the time.
Yep.
And you're tipping one way or the other, and you need to try and maintain that balance of being self-critical, not tipping over into thinking you're worthless, and not tipping the other way into believing you're press.
Yep.
As it were, and so I think when that becomes a habit, which it has now been a habit for me for 4 decades, sometimes it's difficult to want to be out there in a really kind of how would you put it? Well, in a really obvious way, I suppose. Right. I suppose in a way I'm quite content to be in the background, getting on with what I'm doing, and enjoying the teaching and enjoying making images, and yeah, just enjoying the conversations.
I just want to thank you. You've been incredibly open, which I think is always an admirable trait, because I think it's worth mentioning for people who are watching this that this is the first time you and I have actually ever had a conversation. So for you to be as open and expressive as you've been is really welcome from my point of view, and it's a real pleasure to talk to you. And thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you for the questions. Thank you for the conversation.
You're welcome.